Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
All right, welcome back into Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. It is the evening of July 30th. Joey will be proud of me because I think for the first time, and this is our fourth season preview we're recording here tonight, I made sure to say what the time and the date was. So the evening of July 30th, because we don't know when these podcasts are going out yet. Fall camps are getting fired up all over the place. There's a major injury. I don't want everybody to think we're an idiot and just didn't talk about it. Conor O'Neill, it's time to talk about Wake Forest, by the way. Conor O'Neill, Deacons Illustrated, Devils Illustrated also covers the Duke Blue Devils on the Rivals Network as well. Want to make sure to plug all your stuff, Connor. But we're here tonight to talk about the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, so appreciate you jumping back on again, as always.
Yeah, my pleasure. You sparked my memory. I think didn't we record last year? And then there was some timing issue when Wake announced that Donovan Green was going to be out for 3 to 5 months, like an hour before this dropped or an hour after it or something like that.
That's right. And you know what? We waited like a week to publish that podcast. And so when that happened, ironically, this is the first time I've remembered at the top of the podcast to announce the time and the date. And it's very fitting considering what happened last year. So thanks for reminding me, but that's exactly what happened. So let's start here. Dave Clawson back again another year, and time again we have these conversations when we have you on the podcast, like, all right, Dave Clawson, he's back again at Wake, and he's, he had all these really good runs, right? Good quarterback play, even excellent quarterback play, some of the best quarterback play in school history for a few of the years there. Offense humming, defense always kind of a work in progress, hit or miss, but Wake Forest was always competitive in a very competitive ACC Atlantic Division for like years. When Clemson was ruling everything, Wake Forest was always in the mix, it felt like, for the second or third best team in the Atlantic, especially when Florida State was down. Now we're in this divisionless conference. We're in this era of NIL. Things are very different, and Wake Forest is coming off of a year where they went 4-8, only one win in the conference last year, 1-7 in ACC play. And Wake Forest is one of those schools, right? And we're seeing it a lot in the G5, but Wake Forest is one of those schools, low to mid-tier Power 5 program, or I guess Power 4 program, that, if you have a player or two that plays really good football and you have a bigger program with a bigger NIL bag that wants to snag that player off the roster, they'll come to a school like Wake Forest where they know they're being well coached by Clawson, and they've had past success, and they've played some big-time football in the ACC. Has Clawson's outlook, as far as you can tell, has his outlook on the Wake Forest job changed in the last few years? And then the second part of the question is, we talked about in the past, Clawson maybe, if he were going to leave, it would be a very specific type of school because of the success he's had at a very academically centric institution at Wake Forest. But a lot of those jobs opened, right, and he didn't take them in the last couple cycles. And now he's here coming off his worst season in a while at Wake Forest. So I guess the second part of the question is, did he miss his window if he wanted to leave? So let's start there.
So we're starting with the second part?
Let's start there. Yeah, the second part. Did he miss his window?
I don't think so, because I don't think that window ever really closes until a coach is retired for a few years. I think you can get out and still come back in.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, is Bronco Mendenhall back coaching?
Yeah, he is. I want to say New Mexico. Does that sound right?
I know it's somewhere out west where he can still be on a ranch and be like a farmhand for 6 months of the year if he wanted to.
It is New Mexico, confirmed.
So that's one where it's like Bronco Mendenhall got out, and it coincidentally, Dave and Bronco were really close when they were in the ACC together for those few years. Bronco Mendenhall gets out, and every indication is that this guy is burnt out. He's done. He's accomplished everything that he could accomplish theoretically at Virginia, given the resources and the facilities and the recruiting level he was. And it was just kind of like, oh, wow, that guy, he's just doesn't have it anymore. All of a sudden, he's back in college football, right? So I don't know that I'd ever say the window is closed until you're like 5 years removed from when these guys retire.
Yep.
I do think that Dave not taking some of the jobs that have opened kind of indicates that Wake Forest is going to be the last place that he works as far as being a football coach. Now, I say it that way because I do think there's an avenue, and good luck to anybody trying to predict what the structure of not only college football, but college athletics in general is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years. I do think there's an avenue and probably I don't want to use the word market, but there are some possibilities that could happen and play out where college football needs kind of a governing board or
Yeah.
a commissioner. I'm not saying Dave Clawson is going to be the grand poobah of all of college football and be the commissioner of the whole kid and caboodle there, but he is smart enough. He is well versed enough to take that type of position and kind of transition from being really good for one school to being really good and working toward getting college football all on the same page. And that's, I think, if he works at a place past Wake Forest, I think it'll be more in that capacity than it would be him leaving to go start a new program somewhere else.
Right.
I've lost track of his age. I always look it up in the middle of August because his birthday always is, I think it's like August 17th, I want to say. It's always the day of fall camp where they play Talking Heads for the stretching routine before practice because that's his favorite band. But yeah, I can't see him taking on a rebuilding project. Pick any school that might be up for one of those in the next 3 to 4 months. I just can't see him doing that. I can see him. It's ironic and maybe it's a little. It's a word I'm looking for. Paradoxical, maybe, to say that he's not going to take a rebuilding job for another college and their team, but he's going to take a rebuilding job for all of college football. But it's just kind of the way that if I know Dave the way I think I do, that's more of the direction I would see for him.
That's really interesting because I let you know before we hit record I was going to ask you a question like this, and that answer was actually not what I anticipated because my follow-up was, could you see him going like, I mean, we just saw it with Jeff Hafley at Boston College, now the defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers, and that's like obviously an excellent opportunity at the NFL level, right? So maybe that's not the best example. A better example might be Chip Kelly leaving UCLA to go to Ohio State and be their OC, right? Leaving a head coaching job to then go, ironically, within the conference, because UCLA is a Big Ten school now, but going within the conference and becoming an OC at a program like Ohio State, and a big impetus for Kelly's move. And Hafley talked about it too after he got the Packers job. He said, I was kind of not too thrilled with the direction of college football, right? And in terms of like what is required of a head coach, like it's no longer just recruiting and coaching, it's recruiting and coaching and NIL collectives, and year over year you don't know what your roster is going to look like. And these coaches are in a position where like they're really happy, in most cases they're really happy about their players like getting paid and making money off name, image, and likeness. But then I understand the roster standpoint of it, where they're like trying to build a roster, trying to recruit, and like they don't know who's going to be where and what that's going to look like. I understand the frustration with that too. Does Dave, I think you kind of answered this already, but like, could you see Dave doing something like Hafley and Chip Kelly did and like going to a bigger school to be an OC?
I'd be utterly shocked by that.
Yeah.
The way that Dave talks about the 1 year that he spent as an OC at Tennessee, Phil Fulmer's last year in 2000, what was the year? 8, I believe.
It's been a while. Yeah.
It was either 8 or 9. I always get it mixed up and have to go to his bio page. But one of those years he was in Knoxville and he was miserable. He did not enjoy the strain of going out to a restaurant with his family and being told how bad of an offensive coordinator and play caller he was.
Yeah.
And it's just, and you follow Dave's movements before then and since then. He is not a guy that seeks out one of those big time glamour, almost a college team that is the professional team of that state or of that city. When you're looking at pretty much most of the SEC schools,
Yeah.
That's just not who he's been, and I can't see him deciding that's who he's going to be for. I don't want to say the twilight of his career, but certainly the backstretch of his career.
Right. Yeah, it would be more interesting to see him go like an administrative type route, like you said. Yeah. And I do think that makes sense, just considering, at least in the near term, the positions that he's, I don't want to say turned down, but like he was rumored as a candidate several places last few years, and it just like never really materialized. I don't know if the Virginia Tech one was like the closest one, but like he was at least in the mix. I remember talking to you about it at the time, and it seemed more like that might be a contractual play rather than like him actually seriously considering leaving.
It's the closest public one, at least that I'm aware of.
Right, me too.
Over the last 7 years.
Yeah, me too.
That's the one that had a press conference where I had to go in and ask, Dave, there's been reports. Yeah, that's the one I've gone in and asked the question. It's gotten to that point. And I think that's the only one that's gotten to that point.
Yeah, everywhere else has been like, oh, Dave Clawson would be a cool idea. It's like, okay, that's it. That's all you hear about it. He's on like an initial list, and that's about all you hear.
Yep.
All right. Well, I mean, Wake Forest goes 4-8 last year. Obviously, things didn't go well for a variety of reasons. I mean, the chief among them was the fact that they couldn't keep a quarterback healthy, and then even when a quarterback was healthy, they couldn't find one that was really effective consistently enough, and they were just kind of shuffling guys in and out. Well, they go to a transfer portal, and they get Hank Bachmeier, who's got to be on like his 6th or 7th year of college football. He's been all over the place. Yeah, 6. There we go. It's hard to keep track with COVID. Figured it was that long. I remember when he was a freshman at Boise and getting playing time. That felt like half a decade ago, so that makes sense. He's in, right? But they also returned Michael Kern to the fold, and I know we're like a couple days into fall camp, but what can you tell me based on at least what you know? I know you haven't been in a practice yet, but based on what you know tonight, what can you tell me about the quarterback battle between Kern and Bachmeier? Is it Bachmeier's job to lose just because he's an incumbent transfer and he's got more experience, or like is Kern going to make a serious play here?
I don't think so. Michael Kern is really kind of fascinating to me. He's the 6th year guy who's been at Wake for all 6 years, right? Or 5, and then this is going to be 6.
Been there a while, yeah.
Yeah. So he's kind of got the inside track knowledge of the offense. It's still the same offensive coordinator. It's almost the same exact offensive staff has been there for all of Dave Clawson's tenure, and this is going to be year 11. So Michael Kern has that ahead of Hank Bachmeier. Hank Bachmeier's played more football than Michael Kern because Michael was behind Sam Hartman, and before that he was behind Jamie Newman for a little bit. Like, it goes back that far.
Yeah.
2019 for Michael. And then Michael really got robbed last year. He finally gets put in there against Virginia Tech and had some success moving the ball, had more success than Mitch Griffiths has had
yep.
at that point. And then real late in the game in Blacksburg got, I think, driven into the ground and had a shoulder injury that cost him a month.
Yep.
So, you're running down the hypotheticals and the only purpose of hypotheticals is drive yourself crazy. But if you keep Michael Kern healthy, you've got about half of a season or maybe more to evaluate whether he can be a starting quarterback. And if he'd played well enough, maybe Wake steals a win. They only needed to win 5 to get into a bowl game. It's a 4-8 team that was 1-7 in the ACC. If they beat Syracuse in the finale, they're both 5-7, and Wake is in a bowl because of the APR stuff.
APR, yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough to say that Michael Kern doesn't have a shot. And I know that I just saw somebody on one of the Facebook groups say that they brought in Hank Bachmeier, this big time transfer, and it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, Hank Bachmeier is a nice transfer. It's not like he was the most sought after quarterback in the portal.
It's not like Cam Ward is coming to Winston-Salem, or
Right.
something like that, right?
To me, Hank bringing in Hank Bachmeier is almost a litmus test of Wake figuring out whether transfer QBs can come in and learn the RPO. They bristle at calling it the slow mesh.
Yep.
So I've taken to call it the spread option with a heavy influence of RPO stuff.
Or the RPO walk, as the College Football 25 video game calls it now. The RPO
I like
walk.
that. I like that.
Like it too. Yeah. Yep.
I think if I had to guess, Wake probably had a hand in not having it named the slow mesh.
Yeah.
But I think Wake wants to figure out if transfer QBs can play well at Wake.
Yeah.
And bringing in a guy like Hank Bachmeier, who is been through some battles. He's been around when the bullets have been flying, both at Boise State and Louisiana Tech last year. You're figuring out if that's an avenue you can take in the future with maybe a guy who's not entering his last year and just looking to kind of extend his career. I don't know if Hank Bachmeier wants to play football. I'm sure he wants to play football until he's told he can't anymore or until he doesn't want to anymore.
That's why he's still here.
That's why he's going to be playing a college football season when he's 25 years old. But, I think he's as much a litmus test as he is a big-time transfer that has to be given the job. And if he doesn't win the job, then it was a terrible decision to bring him to Wake Forest. Like, that's not really the page that I'm on. I'm on the page of if Hank Bachmeier comes in and is successful, then Wake can look at bringing in other transfer QBs in the future. Not that they're all the same,
right?
But it will just prove the fact to the staff more than they need to prove to you or I or any fan out there. They'll prove to themselves that it can work. Like they don't just have to rely on hitting with your freshman quarterback recruit at least like once every 2 or 3 years. And then you've got to keep them there, obviously, and keep them from transferring out.
Yep. I'm very interested to see kind of how the quarterback race shapes out, and that angle you took with that answer about Bachmeier is going to be really interesting because I think Wake Forest is in a position, like I kind of mentioned off the top, where like they're going to be ripe to have guys plucked just because of the NIL situation at Wake. And I hate talking about this, but like relative to other like mid-tier P4 programs, like how's Wake doing on the NIL front? And I'm so sick of talking about this, but like it's so important right now with the roster turnover and things like that. I got to ask the question.
I mean, you look at it and you have preconceived notions of what Wake looks like, and every December when the announcements start pouring in, you're dealing with all the fan reaction of, oh my God, this is the worst thing to ever happen in college sports. It's not college sports anymore. Are we?
Right.
My favorite one is, are we going to have a team next year? Like, no, they're going to play 7-on-7
They're
in
folding
the
it up.
rec league of Forsyth County. But we get to this point and you look at it, it's like Jasheen Davis is as good of an edge rusher as anybody in the ACC has.
Yep.
And Wake is able to keep him and get him to come in for a 5th season. I would bet a large amount of money that he will be a first or second round pick, or first or second day pick, one of those top 100 picks in the NFL draft in a few months. They had 2 really good running backs last year, Justice Ellison and Damon Claiborne. The one they have back is Damon Claiborne. He's the younger and more explosive running back of those 2.
Fly.
He's the one they're able to keep. They get Donovan Green back for his 6th season. He weirdly has 2 years of eligibility left after this one. I don't think anybody in that situation wants him to see him back at Wake Forest. Like, they want to see him catch 60 passes for 1,000 yards and go to the NFL, which he probably would have been out of here a year or 2 ago if he'd been healthy.
Right.
They're able to bring back Devontae Gordon, who is a really good left tackle. He's going to be a 4-year starter when he leaves after this season. They've got players. The one that hurts and the one that stings, and I think if it's just one guy every year, then you can live with it. You know, Deshaun Jones is a returning starter at corner. He goes through all of spring practices. He's going to be like the one guy in the secondary who's back at the same position that he played last year, and he decides to go into the portal after spring practice, and within a couple days is committed to Alabama to go be maybe their third corner. I don't think they're playing him over guys that are projected draft picks. So that's a tough pill to swallow. And that's one of the ones where you look at it and it's like, well, that position's even more of a construction project in fall camp than it was already going to be. But again, I think if you're looking at the total sum of what they could have lost, what you assume that a school like Wake is going to lose with the talent that they have, the development that they've kind of proven. Like, it's no secret among college coaches that Wake knows how to coach guys that are going to be successful. I think when you look at the whole package, Wake turned out pretty good in terms of keeping the guys that they needed to keep.
I don't think Wake Forest is necessarily in a situation like we're seeing like in the MAC, where basically if you're a player worth a damn, you're on a P4 roster the following year. Like, I don't think it's quite I don't think it's quite that bad. But I am interested like how this landscape is going to affect teams that, you know, have historically been in the bottom of the P5, right? Like, Wake Forest has had this great run with Clawson, but historically Wake Forest as a football program they were historically a bottom feeder in the ACC, you know.
Oh, sure. I think the school's winning percentage is still like 432.
Yeah.
I mean, it's down there.
It's a testament to Clawson. Is all that it is. Simply a testament to what he's built, and how good of a coach he is. We'll get back to the defense in a second because I know you mentioned the Deshaun Jones transfer. I know it's a young secondary. We'll get into that in a second. But back to the offense, we'll see what happens at quarterback, right? It seems like Kern will at least have his say in the competition. We'll see. It probably wouldn't surprise you or I to see two quarterbacks this season at some point.
I mean,
with the way last year went.
Clawson's coached 10 years, and there have been 3 that he started the same quarterback every game.
Right.
The first one was his first season, and John Walford was beaten to a bloody pulp over 12 games and sacked something like 50 times. Yeah. And that's before you start talking about how many other teams had Wake's playbook.
Shout out Shane Beamer.
The other 2 years that Clawson started the same quarterback every year was 2020, the COVID year. Sam Hardman started every game.
Yep. Ironically,
they only played 9, and that was kind of like just, you know, get to games. Clawson said it. If you even started a game that year, it was kind of a victory in itself. Before
Trevor Lawrence, Trevor Lawrence missed he was a Heisman candidate. He missed like 3 games that year.
Yeah. And then 21 also, when Wake won 11 games and went to the Gator Bowl and went to the ACC championship game. That was also, every game was started by Sam. So it's no easy task to get through a season starting the same quarterback for every game. And I would probably have my money on both Hank Bachmeier and Michael Kern wind up starting at least one game this year apiece.
The good news for whoever the quarterback ends up being is there's plenty of skill position talent still on this roster, right? You mentioned Damon Claiborne coming back. He can just flat out fly. He's an electric player. We talked about him a lot last year. I know, kind of being in a little bit of a running back share in the backfield, but now it's kind of his show. He's electric.
To an extent, it's always going to be a timeshare with Wake. They're never going to play the same running back unless they are down to the last running back available. So Tate Carney will be in there as a bruiser and as a change of pace. And he had some decent moments. I think he had a 100-yard game against Vanderbilt last year. he's gonna provide a boost. I don't know who 3 is. Like that's and Clausen and Warren Ruggiero, they always want to have 3, at least. And so
And
the
they're
next 3
young.
weeks,
I mean, they're young behind Carney, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's a pretty young
they
backfield when
have
you go
one
down the depth chart.
transfer who came in. Kennedy Fauntleroy is a fun name to say. I'm blanking on where he came from. They have so many transfers to keep track of,
Uh-huh.
but
Plus, you're
he came
covering
from
2 schools. I mean,
he
it's
came
tough.
from a lower level too, so it's not like he came from Virginia or something like that.
Right.
Kennedy Fauntleroy does sound like a name that would be on the Virginia football roster,
True.
but yeah, they'll have to figure out in the next 3 weeks who number 3 is. But at the top with Claiborne and Carney, I think they're really set.
Taylor Moran, Horatio Fields, Donovan Green. I mean, you mentioned Green, and the fact that he's back again and has multiple years of eligibility left is something. I would assume if he's healthy, this will be his last year at Wake Forest. This is a talented receiver room, and I feel like, for all the shortcomings Wake Forest had as an offense last year, which is crazy to say with how productive they've been of late, like within the last 5 years, it does feel like they're due for a little bit of a bounce back if they get quarterback right, just considering the skill position talent that seems like is back and is healthy back on the roster.
They see, like, quarterback play affected so much last year. I don't think they got very good receiver play. I don't think they got receiver play that was as good as the talent that they had there. And it's such a roundabout conversation of, well, the quarterback play was bad, so the receiver play must have been the receiver play couldn't have been good because of how bad the quarterback play was. The quarterback play was bad because sometimes the offensive line play was really bad.
Right.
And the quarterback play couldn't have been good because of how bad the offensive line play was.
Right.
I think getting Donovan Green back is going to stabilize some things. He's also, I kept looking at him last year and thinking they had 2 guys that could run past you in Taylor Morin and Keyshawn Williams, but they weren't going up to win any contested catches. And they had 1 guy in Jamal Banks who could win a contested catch, but wasn't running past anybody. Donovan Green is kind of the bridge there. He's the guy that can do both of those things. And he's proven it when he's been healthy, that he has burner type speed, that he can catch a quick slant and take it 70 yards to the house. Or you can throw him a deep ball and he can turn a 50-50 ball into an 80-20 ball. So that's what they need out of Donovan Green. I put a story out in July that basically called him the most important player on the roster. He's the most, term it this way, he's the most irreplaceable player. If he goes down, I don't know who fills what they need him to be, assuming that he is who they need him to be. And then it's going to be about what young players that might be kind of out of sight, out of mind to the casual ACC football fan are going to step up. Micah Mays came in with a lot of big recruiting ink. It was kind of a fight to get him to signing day. He had some suitors. I know Miami was involved late. He redshirted last year. He was still pretty raw. Now and in the next couple weeks is when you start looking for a guy like that to emerge and prove that he can perform at a level where he can take some snaps away from Donovan Green. Donovan Green won't have to play 90% of the snaps in a game to really be effective. They have a freshman that came in who's 6'5", 190, just all gangly arms and legs, Jeremiah Melvin. I think this year will be a little early for him, but you never know. Maybe he works his way into a rotation there.
Right.
Deuce Alexander is kind of the next big thing in the slot. I think they'll have Taylor Morin in the slot. He's bounced back between the slot and perimeter so many times in his career that I've lost track of whether he's better at one or the other. I think he's better in the slot, though. Deuce will be his backup, and he got to show late last year, as everything was going wrong, that the future with him is pretty bright. Yeah. So he's definitely a name to kind of keep on the back burner as far as a guy who will get in there in the third series of a game, and you'll realize that there's a different slot receiver in there, and all of a sudden he'll he'll be making some things happen, and it's like, oh, okay, that's a guy that I need to watch.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
You mentioned the offensive line play, how throughout last year it was a struggle a lot of times. I mean, Michael Juergens made an all-ACC team, but he's gone. This is not, I don't want to call it patchwork offensive line. I mean, they're returning some starters, but I think there is still some question marks regarding, okay, the guys that are returning, whether or not the continuity is a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because we can talk about returning production, and we can talk about, okay, we've got these offensive linemen back, and we got a lot, we got X amount of starters back on the offense, but the offense wasn't that good. Like, if you're returning guys, is that necessarily a good thing, or do you need a little bit of turnover, right? That's kind of the question I have about the Wake Forest offensive line. Is the continuity that's coming back a good thing? And then how do you replace, obviously, the production of Michael Juergens, who was like the bright spot in a pretty porous offensive line last year?
Yeah, my former sports editor when I was at the Burlington Times News, around this time of year when it was high school football preview time, used to tell me that to stop writing so much about how many returning starters were on these high school football teams, because if a team was 2-9 the previous year, it might not be such a good thing that they have 21 starters returning.
Right.
Those might not be very good players.
Right. Could be, okay, the young guys got a lot better and made a jump, but not everybody's making a jump.
Right. But it's not the greatest comparison or reference with Wake's offensive line. I do think there's some talent up there. The biggest one to kind of keep in mind is they had a lot of injuries last year.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't keep Spencer Clapp healthy. He was a 7th-year guy at tackle. So when you had the tackle who was in and out of the lineup so many times and was trying to play hurt and probably was out there when he was not close to 100% just because he was trying to give you something. You're moving guys from other positions where they're not as comfortable. I can't remember who it was, but at one point, it was in the first month of the season. At one point, I looked down there and it's like, they've got a guy playing right tackle. I watched almost every fall camp. I don't ever remember seeing him play a tackle snap. It was that level of like, oh my God, they're really throwing some stuff against the wall and hoping it sticks here.
Really shuffling. Yeah.
The one injury that really probably went unnoticed, I don't know, unnoticed, but kind of flew under the radar last year. Nick Sharp is a road grader guard, and they lost him, I believe, in the Vanderbilt game, which was the second game of the year. I think he's a future NFL guard. I always think of it this way. Wake loves to get the offensive lineman recruit who is between 260 and 280 pounds, and they put them in the incubator. They're the multi-sport athletes. They've been playing basketball, baseball, everything they can do. So their mobility is great because they're multi-sport guys.
Right.
They're just not big. They have to go into the weight room, and you're not going to see them for 2 years because they have to get them bulked up. Nick Sharp is like one of the exceptions that they've taken. Nick Sharp came in, I think, at like 380 or 350. Like, he was a massive number. They had to get down. and now they've got him to a mobile like 330. He's going to be really good. I would have him. You know, if anybody votes that listens for the All ACC stuff, I would keep that in mind for the end of the year. And then you're kind of banking on guys like Luke Pettibone. Goes through last season as the starting center. He got jumbled around just like everybody else. You're thinking that he's going to be more comfortable and better as a returning starter. Same with kind of Matt Golban. And, you know, you're also, as always, you're hoping to stay healthy so that those guys don't have to bounce around as much as they did last year, and they can kind of settle into their positions and to their places and roles on the offensive line.
Over to defense. The defensive line has a lot coming back. I know that. We talked about Sheen Davis. That's huge, right? All ACC caliber pass rusher.
Yeah.
Probably going to be a high draft pick in April as long as he stays healthy. A lot of guys back up front. Linebacking core gets a lot better. And I know they added an intriguing FCS transfer in Branson Combs. 2-time Missouri Valley Conference player of the second team player. He was good player, yeah. Right? You're adding to the linebacking core, got some experience back there, and I know the secondary is young, but Nick Anderson's back. So I feel like for a defense that was very up and down last year, there are some positive signs, at least on paper, heading into camp, considering what they're bringing back in the front seven, what they added at linebacker, and then even though it's a young secondary, having Anderson kind of anchor it, I feel like there is some continuity there. And I hope that, obviously, in the secondary especially, you can kind of bring some guys along a little bit more quickly as long as you have a productive pass rush.
Yeah, I think you're banking on, if you're Wake, you're banking on the fact that you're strong in the front six.
Yeah.
They typically only play 2 linebackers at a time. With the depth they have at linebacker, they can at least entertain the idea of playing 3 of them at a time. Whether that means going to a 3-man line or taking the nickel off the field, we'll see. But yeah, they've got depth at linebacker. They've got a good start with the defensive line. I love Sheen Davis. I love Kevin Pointer. They are going to get what they need out of Bryce Ganius, I think. It's a strong front. And I think, like you said, you're kind of hoping that the strong front can at least give you some buffer to get experience for your secondary. You're hoping that, I guess, you know, there's nothing you can do if the other team wants to do it, but you're hoping that those guys don't get torched for 300 yards a game in September. Like you're kind of, and that's kind of why you bring in the transfers that they did. Capone Blue, I think, is going to be a really good difference maker as a corner. Came in from Kent State, played a ton of football there. There's your MAC transfer shout out.
Yep.
They also brought in, I think it's Sedarius Kelly from Lenore-Rhine. So they're throwing some numbers at secondary. Off the top of my head, I don't think they've gotten desperate enough to the point where they're changing any positions to get numbers over there. You're always kind of, you know, for the Wake fans, they'll remember Jesse Bates leaving early and Chuck Wade all of a sudden had to go play safety after playing receiver for, I think, 4 years.
Yep.
Sorry if I got that wrong, and it was only 3 years, Chuck. But yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like, they're not desperate enough to have any position changes yet, but they're throwing some transfers in there. They're moving guys around. Evan Slocum is playing safety. He was a nickel last year with Nick Anderson. So we'll see what the secondary looks like.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I've got some doubts. The doubts are probably going to exist throughout fall camp because it's just fall camp.
Right.
But there's enough on the defense to where they're not going to be broken at every place, right? Like the secondary is really the spot where you look at and say, we need that to come along. I think they're happy with, as long as things progress, with the other position groups.
And they add Capone Blue from Kent State.
Yep.
You said, right? So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like for a secondary that didn't look fantastic last year, and I know they're young again. Front seven, I mean, you just hope the passer. Front six, I guess. It depends on what they do. I just
right.
I feel like they're really throwing a lot of linebackers and secondary pieces at the problem, right, in the portal, and I just feel like they're going to find a way to kind of supplement the issues they had last year and just hope it's like a little bit better. I having the pass rush, the continuity up front is, I feel like, gigantic, just based on how that defense looked at times last year. I just feel like having that back, you can't expect it to be a little bit better, right? And I think that's all that Clausen and his staff can hope for compared to a year ago with all the issues they had on offense. You just hope the defense can kind of just hold their own and kind of both sides of the ball just get a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's where I really think that the overall record and the end of year statistics kind of shroud the defense took decent steps last year for the first month to month and a half of the year.
I would agree.
It was really when they wore thin and when they had to play teams like Florida State, NC State, when I think they got Brennan Armstrong back in their quarterback carousel at the end of the year.
Yep.
They had to go to Notre Dame and play Sam Hartman. The Syracuse game was a disaster, and Syracuse, I think, had a tight end playing quarterback or whatever that situation was.
It's a mess.
Can't remember what that one was. And giving up 35 points was bad, but that's the last game of the year. That's when your depth is worse than it ever has been. Year two under Brad Lambert was not the setback or train wreck or disaster that some people wanted to make it out to be.
Yeah.
Just looking at the final statistics from the season, like there were gains made. They happened to be kind of skewed because of how the season ended.
It's a big we'll see.
Yeah.
It's big we'll see.
And that's where we've been with Wake's defense for like 8 seasons now.
Forever. But the offense was such a sure thing that we were like, all right, well, I mean, the defense is what it is, but the offense is so good. Like, there's no way this team's not winning less than 7 games. I mean, that's how good the offense was for so long.
Right.
I mean, looking at the schedule, right? I mean, the team goes 4-8 last year, right? They win 1 conference game. This schedule could be worse. Like, you do draw a few really, really tough opponents. Like, obviously, having Ole Miss in week 3 is not great. Having to go on the road to NC State is not great. Following that up 1 week later with Clemson is not great. And then at Miami towards the end of the year. But, like, I look at the rest of the schedule, and, like, if Wake Forest offensive line, a lot of ifs here, right? But, like, if Wake Forest offensive line plays better than a year ago, if quarterback play is more consistent, right, and kind of returns to the mean, because I feel like last year was just such an aberration compared to what we're used to seeing out of Dave Clawson run offense as a quarterback.
Sure.
And if the defense just kind of goes back to being, like, closer to an average unit rather than, below average because of all the injuries they had, which I think is a really good point by you, right? There are a lot of winnable games on this schedule, like A&T to open it up. That you got to win that game. I think UVA in week 2 is a toss-up, considering where UVA is, and I think historically, like the last 5 years, Wake Forest has been a better program than UVA outside of like that random Orange Bowl year that UVA had with Bryce Perkins. Like Wake Forest has been a better program.
Yeah.
Louisiana, end of September. No reason to think that Wake Forest can't be competitive there, right? They're not the same team, the same program that they were under Napier. You go on the road to UConn, at Stanford. I think it's a weird game because you're going across the country, but that's winnable considering where Stanford's at. You host Cal. UNC, we'll see. You get Duke at the end of the year, which could end up being a really, really important game for bowl eligibility. You'd rather get them probably for both teams. You'd probably, better than anybody, you'd probably rather get Duke at the beginning of the year than the end of the year, considering like what Duke can be in terms of like continuity and getting used to what Manny Diaz wants to do.
Yeah,
it's a big we'll see.
I always think of the depth is kind of the same with those schools. They're always just, by the end of November, you're fighting that constant battle of how many guys do we have available to play at each spot, where can we ill afford to even miss a series at this position.
And they're very similar, like both programs I feel like are very similar in that regard. I just feel like Duke is going to catch. It's interesting though, because like Duke I think can almost like catch teams off guard a little bit in the beginning of the year, like in September, because nobody really knows what that's going to look like. And I think people are relatively high on the Manny Diaz hire at Duke, just because I thought he did a decent job at Miami, got railroaded a little bit, just because it was like, oh, Mario Cristobal's like hanging out there, but Diaz wasn't terrible at Miami. He was fine.
When you have a chance to hire the prodigal son who's going to be awful with game management, then you got to do it.
That's what I always say. This might end up actually working out a lot better for Manny Diaz. He just doesn't know it yet. We'll see. I don't know. I'm pretty high on that hire, so we'll see what that looks like. But I mean, I look at this schedule. I think the way it lays out, there are some tough games. Obviously, some games where I'm like, they definitely will not win that one. But also, I'm like, you know what? There are a lot of games on the schedule where I feel like Wake Forest is competitive, and enough 50-50 games where I'm like, you know what? If things fall the way that they could and kind of get back to average, I think Wake Forest does have a chance to make a bowl game.
Yeah, and look, I think we're realistic here. I think you're not going into the season expecting Wake Forest to compete for an ACC championship. I don't think anybody expects Ole Miss to come to Winston-Salem in week 3 and leave with a loss.
Right.
But I do think that a successful season for Wake can be finding a pathway to 6 or 7, possibly 8 wins if a lot of things go right. And that's a good year.
Right.
That's if you go 8-4 after going 4-8 or 8-5, whatever it would be with a bowl win.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hell of a coaching job. That's a hell of a job by the players who will have turned things around in a 1-year span. But yeah, like the avenue's there, and you want to give it the all due respect. Like, all due respect, Wake is not going into the season thinking national championship or bust, or
Right.
they're not going into the season thinking along the lines of a Penn State where they've been knocking on the door and now they have to make the playoff because it's expanded. That's not the thought process here. The thought process is get the thing back on track. They had a really nice run going with, 7 straight bowls or 6 straight, I think it was 7. 7 straight bowl games. That ended, boo-hoo, and you can move on and make a bowl game, and it'll be 8 of 9. Right. And that's I think that's kind of the road that needs to be taken, and then if you have that type of season, then you're running through the same scenarios that we talked about at the beginning of this, where you're seeing how much talent you can return, you're seeing what you can do in the portal, and then you're trying to build building blocks like you were in like 2017, 18, and 19 that eventually led you to a year later, the 21 season, where Wake made the ACC championship game, won 11 games, and had one of the best seasons in program history.
I just feel like 2023 was just with the injuries and stuff like that. I know the quarterback play was what it was. I just feel like it was more of an aberration, obviously, given Clawson's track record at Wake Forest. And I feel like there's enough games on the schedule. Like, I look Ole Miss September 14th at NC State on October 5th and October 12th against Clemson. Like, if I'm Wake, I don't feel fantastic about any of those 3 games.
Yeah, those 3 games, if Wake wins one of the 3, then they're ecstatic.
Well, if they win one of the 3, I think they're going to a bowl game because I look at the rest of the schedule
absolutely.
and I just think there's enough like winnable games / toss-up games. Like those are 3 games we mentioned where I'm like not expecting Wake to win at all, and like the other 9, it's either in the they should win or toss-up 50-50 bucket. And I feel like coming off of 4-8 season, you can't ask for much more than that.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, do I think Wake Forest will win all the games that like I think they could win? No. Do I think that they could win like 65% of them given Clawson's track record? Like absolutely, which is why I think they're in play for a bowl game here. On the record, I'll say 5-7. I think 6-6 is definitely in the cards. I think it really just hinges on offensive line and quarterback and then how the secondary looks. And I know that's like the easy way out, but it's like I think that they'll hit on a couple of those things. And then if one doesn't hit, it's how does the rest of the unit compensate, right? Like
Sure.
if they don't hit on the second, like if the secondary really struggles, like, okay, is there enough in the front 6 to compensate? If they don't hit on quarterback, is there enough at the skill positions where it's like, all right, we can survive like mediocre quarterback play enough to make a bowl game? Those are kind of the questions I have.
I would put it at where's my hand? Quarterback plays here.
Yeah, always.
The other 2 are here.
Always, yeah, always.
And
yep.
Maybe that's being a prisoner of what last year looked like with bad quarterback play.
It was bad, dude.
I just think it probably is this way for every single program in the country other than the service academies. And maybe it is for them too. You have to have good quarterback play or you're not going to get anything right. Like
Army anyway. I mean, Army's not running the triple as much as they used to. I mean,
that's right.
They can fall in that bucket, but
yeah, it's funny. Wake finally moves away from playing Army in the non-conference, and I forget everything about Army football because I don't have to spend a week learning what they do.
It was optioned for so long until it wasn't.
Yeah,
and that's because everybody thought Monken was going to try to get a job somewhere else, and then.
Yeah, there should be a constitutional amendment that those schools have to run the triple option.
I mean, Navy has run the same offense for as long as I've been alive, right? I'm 32. I feel like they've been running the same offense for all 32 years I've been on the planet, so I just expect them to continue to do that.
Yeah, you got to give into that.
Exactly.
Triple option's beautiful when it's run correctly.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of group of 5 teams should just start running the triple. I'm all aboard that train. Do you think Wake Forest makes a bowl game? Yes or no? Gun to your head.
I kind of do.
Yeah.
Maybe you're catching me like this is peak optimism season when you think everything's going to go right and everything's going to work itself out. If you ask me 3 weeks from tonight, I might tell you that this team is terrible and they'd be lucky to win 3 games. But right now at this point, I do think that it's going to be a bounce back, and I think they're going to wind up in. I don't even want to know what the bowl affiliations are for 6-6 ACC teams that
Fenway
aren't Virginia Tech
Pinstripe.
Or NC State. Yeah, like they're a 6-6. They'd be a 6-6 if they go 6-6. They'd be a 6-6. That isn't exactly the most enticing for those types of bowls that pick from the bottom.
Military, Pinstripe, Fenway Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do think they'll get to a bowl game, and I think, as kind of backhanded a compliment as it is, I think it'll be a successful season if they go 6-6 and go to a bowl game.
I just want to remind people, and I know you'll echo this, what Dave Clawson has done in his 10 years at Wake Forest, going on 11 this season, is nothing short of remarkable when you look at how bad Wake Forest was for so long. I mean, they had like a handful of good Jim Grobe years, but like they've been bad for a while, like decades.
The thing got stale in Jim Grobe's last 3 years, last 3 or 4, and you can never, like, I've had this conversation so many times. Dave Clawson went 3-9 in his first 2 years, and there's no way to accurately evaluate those seasons when you don't know how many teams had their freaking playbook and how many games are different if the other team doesn't know what they're doing. It's just impossible to evaluate. So when you're looking at his tenure, I was talking to somebody the other day. Dave's overall record at Wake Forest is 2 games over 500. He's 63-61. So you're like, oh, why are you gushing over a 500 coach? Well, he started 6-18, and year three, the breakthrough year, was just a 7-6 year with a Military Bowl win. So what we're talking about is kind of, it took a little bit to get off the ground, and once it did get off the ground, there were some really nice seasons that you probably would not have expected in this day and age of college football, at a place like Wake Forest. And now it's about figuring out, can they get back to that level, or have the wheels fallen off, and is more of a kind of overhaul needed? And that's what going 3-9 or 4-8 again would tell us.
Wake Forest was in the freaking Gator Bowl 3 years ago, and they made an ACC championship game. Don't ask a 55 or 60-year-old Wake Forest alum what they think of that accomplishment based on what they've seen. I mean, it's remarkable what he's done. And I mean, I'm with you. Like, the whole Wakey Lakes thing. It was like when you play high school football and, like, nobody, obviously, like, if you're in Virginia like I am, the games aren't, like, televised or anything like that, like they are in Texas on, like, local television and all that. Like, you don't see, like, anything the opponent runs without, like, having to be required to send over film, like, the week of the game. So you basically know what the team is going to run going into the game. You know the formations, all that stuff, outside of, like, a couple of trick plays. That's what Wake Forest was dealing with at an FBS level in a Power 5 conference. That's what they were dealing with for the first couple of years under Dave Clawson. So just keep that in mind. They knew, opponents knew it was coming. It was like playing high school football for a while. Ridiculous. Yeah. All right, you got Wake going to a bowl game. I got them. What the hell? I'll say 6-6, Connor. Officially on the record. I said 5-7. You talked me into it. I'll say 6-6. Dave Clawson's got enough of a track record that I do think it's going to be a bounce back year. It's going to look better regardless. And if he was able to scrape together 4-8, albeit against a little bit tougher schedule last year, but if he was able to scrape together 4-8 last year, when it looked as bad as it did, I feel like there's going to be some improvement here. At least 1 to 2 wins better. I do think Wake Forest ekes out a bowl game. So you talked me into it. Connor, appreciate it, man. I want to give you a chance, as always, to plug your stuff where you're at.
Oh, yeah. Deacons Illustrated is wakeforest.rivals.com. Come through and check it out. It's for the next month. This is like the busiest month of the year. It sometimes feels like practice reports almost every day. Then we'll have coverage leading up to the season. We'll get some notebooks going. We'll get all that good stuff. So come on in and drop by.
And I'll say it too. He's over at Deacons Illustrated too, covering Duke. I mean, you do it all.
Yeah, if any Duke fans found their way in here, that one is duke.rivals.com.
We've got enough. Listen to everything, Got to plug that too. Make you a little bit of money. Connor does great work. Go follow his stuff. Connor, appreciate it, buddy. We'll undoubtedly talk again soon. Certainly after the season, or if something crazy happens mid-season, I'm sure we'll have you on again.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Cool. Yep, appreciate it, man. We'll be back soon. Follow us at BC Podcast ACC on Twitter, youtube.com/at the ACC Football Podcast. Follow all our stuff there. More season previews to come. Joey will be back sometime in August. If you're listening to this in August, maybe he's already back. Who knows? We'll find out when this is released, Connor. We'll see. Hopefully by the time this is released, though, everybody's healthy and we're not losing Donovan Green to like season-ending injury right after we record. So hopefully we avoid that.
I like him so much that I hope his knees are like in bubble wrap for the next few weeks.
I just want to watch him play. That's all I want. So we'll be back soon with more previews. And until then, go ACC.